a worn-out waitress, a lonely billionaire's son, and a simple chessboard in a forgotten corner of a 5-star restaurant. What started as a quiet game between strangers was a single move in a much larger match, one where fortune's futures and the fate of a broken family were all in play. For Arthur Blackwood, it was a test of character. For Isabella Rossi, it was a lifeline. But neither of them knew the secrets. The 64 squares were about to reveal secrets that could either save them or shatter their worlds forever. This isn't just a story about chess. It's a story about the moves we don't see coming. The clinking of silver against porcelain was the symphony of the gilded sparrow, a sound Arthur Blackwood usually found soothing. It was the sound of order, of wealth, of a world that bent to his will. Tonight, however, it was just noise, a grating counterpoint to the restless energy radiating from his 10-year-old son, Oliver. "Can we go home?" "Dad," Oliver whispered, pushing a perfectly seared scallop around his plate with a fork. He hadn't touched his meal. Arthur sighed, loosening the knot of his brioni tie. "Not yet, Ollie. Mr. Davenport is a crucial investor. We just need to wait for him to finish his call." He gestured vaguely toward a portly man in a neighboring booth who was laughing boisterously into his phone. Oliver's shoulders slumped. His gaze drifted to the small velvet bag he'd placed on the empty chair beside him. Inside was his solace, a hand-carved Staunton chess set a gift from his father on his last birthday. Chess was their language, the silent, strategic space where they connected in the vast, quiet expanse of their Atherton mansion. Maybe just one game. Oliver pleaded, his eyes wide and hopeful. Arthur's jaw tightened. Playing chess in the middle of the gilded sparrow felt inappropriate. It was a display of idleness he couldn't afford, especially not when he was trying to project an aura of effortless power for the benefit of his investor. "Oliver, this isn't the place." The words came out colder than he intended. He saw the flicker of hurt in his son's eyes before it was quickly masked by a familiar resignation. Arthur's chest ached with a familiar pang of guilt. Since Charlotte's death 2 years ago, he felt like he was constantly saying the wrong thing, a king trapped in a perpetual state of check. It was in that moment of strained silence that she approached their table. "Excuse me, sir. May I clear this for you?" Her name tag read Isabella. She was a waitress, but the word seemed insufficient. There was an exhaustion etched around her eyes that spoke of long hours, but her gaze was sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. She moved with an economy of motion that suggested a deep well of spent energy. Her uniform was clean, but frayed slightly at the cuffs, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that failed to contain a few rebellious wisps framing her face. Before Arthur could answer, her eyes fell on the velvet bag on the chair. A flicker of something, recognition nostalgia, softened her features for a fraction of a second. Oliver, seeing where she was looking, instinctively reached for the bag. "It's a chess set," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella smiled, a genuine, unforced expression that seemed out of place in the restaurant's opulent formality. "Is it I love chess?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. It was the kind of polite, perfunctory comment service staff made to build rapport. He was about to dismiss it when Oliver, emboldened by her smile, opened the bag and began setting the pieces on a small portable board. "My dad taught me the Sicilian defense," Oliver announced proudly. "A fine opening," Isabella said, her eyes scanning the board. "Aggressive. It fights for the center from the flank. But you have to be careful of the Rossolimo attack if White doesn't play the main line." Arthur froze his wine glass halfway to his lips. That wasn't a waitress's comment. It was a player's comment. He watched her, really watched her for the first time. She wasn't looking at him or trying to impress him. Her focus was entirely on the board and his son. Would you like to play?" Oliver asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of shyness and excitement. Arthur opened his mouth to intervene, to tell the waitress to get back to her job and to remind his son of the restaurant's decorum. But he stopped. He saw the genuine hunger for connection in Oliver's face, a look he hadn't seen in months. Isabella hesitated, her gaze flicking nervously toward the restaurant manager, a stern man named Mr. Dubois, who was prowling the floor like a hawk. "I can't, honey. I'm working." "Please," Oliver begged. "Just one quick game. Dad's waiting for someone." The desperation in his son's voice was a knife in Arthur's gut. He made a decision. He caught Isabella's eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It's fine," he said, his voice low but firm. "Play him. I'll handle Dubois." A look of disbelief, followed by a wave of gratitude, washed over Isabella's face. She pulled up the empty chair, her movements suddenly filled with a quiet grace. She sat opposite Oliver, a world away from the starched linen and polished silver. Arthur expected a simple patronizing game, the kind an adult plays with a child, letting them win to boost their confidence. He was wrong. What unfolded over the next 15 minutes was a masterclass in quiet intensity. Isabella played as white. Her opening was a calm, methodical queen's gambit. Oliver responded with the Slav defense, just as Arthur had taught him. The first 10 moves were standard theory. Arthur watched a detached observer at first, then with growing fascination. Isabella didn't treat Oliver like a child. She played with respect. When he made a good move, a clever knight fork that threatened her rook, she didn't offer praise. She simply paused, her brow furrowed in genuine concentration, and calculated her response. She respected his intelligence enough to give him a real fight. The turning point came around move 17. Oliver, feeling confident, pushed a pawn to attack her bishop, a move that seemed strong on the surface. Arthur saw the flaw immediately. It weakened his son's kingside defense. He resisted the urge to caution him. This was Oliver's game. Isabella's eyes narrowed. She saw it too. But she didn't pounce. Instead, she looked up from the board directly at Oliver. "Are you sure about that move?" she asked softly. "Look at what it opens up. Think 3 moves ahead. What's my best response? And your best response to that?" She wasn't giving him the answer. She was teaching him how to find it himself. Oliver stared at the board, his lips moving silently, as he traced the lines of attack. His eyes widened as he saw the trap he'd nearly fallen into. He retracted his move, a blush creeping up his neck, and instead moved his king to safety. Arthur leaned forward, his half-eaten Dover sole forgotten. He watched her hand steady, unadorned, save for a small scar on her knuckle as it moved the knight. It wasn't just a move. It was a statement. An elegant, brutal declaration of intent. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The game ended 10 moves later. Isabella had methodically dismantled Oliver's position, cornering his king in a beautifully executed checkmate. There was no gloating, no grand gesture. "Checkmate," she said gently. "You played very well. That pawn advance on the queen side was very clever. You just overextended a little on the king side." Oliver wasn't disappointed. He was beaming. He was looking at the board with a new understanding, seeing not just his loss, but the beautiful logical structure of his defeat. For the first time all night, he looked happy. Isabella stood up, her professional demeanor snapping back into place. "I need to get back to work. Thank you for the game, Oliver." "Thank you." Oliver breathed, his eyes shining. As she turned to walk away, Arthur spoke, his voice stopping her in her tracks. "Wait." She turned back, her expression guarded. Mr. Davenport had just ended his call and was gathering his things. Arthur's window of opportunity was closing. He didn't care. Something far more important had just happened at this table. He looked at this woman, this waitress, with the tired eyes and a mind that saw the board 345 moves ahead. He saw more than an employee. He saw a strategist, a teacher, a solution to a problem he didn't even know how to articulate. "What's your last name?" "Isabella," he asked. "Rossi," she replied, a hint of suspicion in her tone. "Isabella Rossi," he repeated, testing the name. He pulled a platinum business card from his wallet. "I have a proposition for you. It has nothing to do with waiting tables." Isabella Rossi stared at the business card as if it were a foreign object. The cardstock was thick, heavy, with embossed lettering that felt like a secret code under her thumb. Arthur Blackwood, CEO Blackwood Dynamics. The name meant nothing and everything. She'd seen it in the financial pages she sometimes scanned during her break, a titan of the tech world, a name synonymous with ruthless innovation and astronomical wealth. And he was sitting in her section at table 7, looking at her with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. "A proposition," she repeated, her voice betraying a sliver of the disbelief churning in her gut. She was acutely aware of Mr. Dubois' glare from across the room. She had been away from her other tables for nearly 20 minutes. That was a fireable offense. "My office, tomorrow. 10 a.m. Arthur said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He gestured toward the card. "My assistant, Janice, will be expecting you." Mr. Davenport was now standing by their table, a wide, expectant grin on his face. Arthur rose smoothly, shaking the investor's hand, his corporate mask slipping perfectly back into place. The transition was so seamless it was chilling. The father who had watched his son play chess was gone, replaced by the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics. Isabella pocketed the card, her mind reeling. She mumbled a good night and retreated to the chaos of the kitchen, the smell of grease and the clang of pans, a jarring return to reality. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of endless orders, demanding customers, and the constant throbbing ache in her feet. But through it all, the weight of that business card in her pocket was a tangible presence, a small rectangular anchor to a world she couldn't comprehend. The next morning, Isabella stood before the gleaming glass and steel monolith that was the Blackwood Dynamics headquarters in the heart of San Francisco's financial district. She felt like a pawn that had wandered onto the wrong board. Her best blouse, carefully ironed, suddenly felt cheap. Her sensible black shoes seemed clumsy on the polished marble floor of the lobby. The elevator ascended in silence, a smooth, swift journey to the stratosphere. Arthur Blackwood's office occupied the entire top floor. It was less an office and more a testament to power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god-like view of the city and the bay beyond. The furniture was minimalist, brutally elegant, and undoubtedly cost more than she made in a year. Arthur was not sitting behind his massive desk. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city he had in many ways conquered. He turned as she entered his suit, as impeccably tailored as it had been the night before. "Ms. Rossi, thank you for coming." He gestured to one of 2 leather chairs facing his desk. "Please." She sat her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt like she was being interviewed for a job she hadn't applied for. "I'll be direct," he began, forgoing any small talk. "I was impressed last night, not just by your skill, but by your method. You didn't patronize my son. You challenged him. You taught him. Oliver, he's a quiet boy. Since his mother passed away, he's retreated even further into himself. Chess is our main point of connection, but I am his father, not his teacher. I have the knowledge, but not the patience, or perhaps not the right kind of patience. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I want to hire you, to be Oliver's chess tutor and companion. 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. We can be flexible with the hours to accommodate your other commitments. The slight hesitation in his voice made it clear he meant her waitressing job. Isabella's mind raced. A chess tutor. The idea was absurd. It was a dream she had buried long ago, a life she had been forced to abandon. Mr. Blackwood, I'm a waitress. I'm not a qualified teacher. You are qualified in the only way that matters to me, he countered. You are a formidable player, and you connected with my son in 15 minutes in a way that most of his school teachers haven't managed in a year. I saw his face last night. That is a qualification no university can provide. He named a salary. The number hung in the air so impossibly large that Isabella thought she must have misheard him. It was more than she made in 6 months of grueling double shifts at the Gilded Sparrow. It was enough to cover 3 months of her father's mounting medical bills. Her father, Marco Rossi, a brilliant chess coach himself, was wasting away in a state-run care facility, his mind, once a beautiful machine of strategy and calculation, now clouded by early-onset Alzheimer's. The cost of proper care of a place with dignity and sunlight was a mountain she could never hope to climb. This salary, it was a foothold. Why? She asked, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. You could hire a grandmaster, a famous coach. Why me? Because a grandmaster would teach Oliver to be a weapon, Arthur said, his voice dropping slightly. They would focus on theory, on winning on aggression. I watched you last night. You taught him how to think. You taught him to respect the game, and in doing so, you respected him. That is what he needs. He doesn't need to be a champion. He needs to be a confident, thoughtful young man. I believe you can help with that. It was a compelling argument. But Isabella was a survivor. Life had taught her that deals that seemed too good to be true usually were. What are the terms? Arthur walked to his desk and picked up a slim leather-bound folder. He slid it across the polished surface toward her. A standard employment contract, with a few additions. She opened it. It was dense with legal jargon, but the salary and hours were exactly as he'd stated. Then she got to the additions. A non-disclosure agreement of staggering scope, binding her to absolute silence on every aspect of the Blackwood family's private life. And another clause, a peculiar one, titled Comprehensive Discretion and Loyalty. It stipulated that her role might, from time to time, involve duties beyond chess tutoring as required for the intellectual and emotional well-being of the minor. It was vague, unsettlingly so. Comprehensive discretion and loyalty. She quoted, her eyes narrowed. What does that mean, Mr. Blackwood? What am I really signing up for? For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. It means that my son's welfare is paramount. It means that you will be entering our private world, and that world must be protected. It is a fail-safe. Nothing more. The answer was as polished and evasive as the desk between them. A warning bell sounded in her mind. This was more than a tutoring job. She was being hired to fill a void, a space left by a dead woman, a space in a lonely boy's life. The vague clause was a blank check giving this powerful man control over her role, her duties. But then an image of her father flashed in her mind. His confused eyes, the drab beige walls of his room, the smell of antiseptic, the mountain of debt. The life he deserved, the life she had promised she would give him. That mountain was insurmountable. Arthur Blackwood was offering her a way to fly over it. Her dream of pursuing a degree in mathematics at Stanford, which she had abandoned to care for her father, felt like a ghost mocking her from the past. This wasn't that dream, but it was a lifeline. A dangerous, complicated lifeline, but a lifeline nonetheless. She looked up from the contract, meeting his intense gaze. Her own was just as steady. She was no stranger to sacrifice, to making difficult moves for survival. This was just another game, on a much grander scale. "I have one condition," Isabella said, her voice clear and strong. Arthur raised an eyebrow, surprised. "I need an advance on the first month's salary, wired today." He studied her for a long moment, his analytical gaze dissecting her, searching for weakness, for leverage. He seemed to find something else instead. Respect. "Done," he said without hesitation. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Janice, please arrange a wire transfer for Miss Rossi and finalize her employment contract." He stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the team, Miss Rossi." Isabella stood and shook his hand. His grip was firm, decisive. As she walked out of that office, the contract signed, and a staggering sum of money on its way to her bank account, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a move from which there was no retreat. She had captured a powerful piece, but in doing so, she might have just placed her own king in a very dangerous position. The Blackwood mansion in Atherton was not a home. It was a statement, a sprawling testament to modern architecture. It was all clean lines, vast glass walls, and cold, polished stone. It was beautiful in the way a museum is beautiful, curated, silent, and intimidating. There was none of the chaotic warmth of Isabella's tiny apartment, which was crammed with her father's old chess books and smelled perpetually of brewing tea and old paper. Her first day was a study in contrasts. She arrived in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, which felt like a dinghy docking next to a fleet of yachts in the circular driveway. She was greeted at the door not by Arthur or Oliver, but by a severe-looking woman with hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to mirror the tension in her jaw. "I am Mrs. Gable," the woman announced, her voice crisp and starched. "The household manager. Mr. Blackwood has informed me of your appointment." The word hung in the air, laden with disapproval. It was clear Mrs. Gable saw her as an intruder, a waitress plucked from obscurity, who had no place in this temple of wealth. Mrs. Gable led her through a cavernous foyer to a sun-drenched room designated as the library. It was 2 stories high, lined with shelves of books that looked untouched. In the center of the room, on a low mahogany table, was a magnificent chessboard, its pieces carved from ivory and obsidian. Oliver was already there, sitting patiently, his small frame almost swallowed by the enormous leather armchair. His face lit up when he saw her. "Isabella, you came." "Of course I did," she said, a genuine smile breaking through her nervousness. "We have a game to finish, or rather a new one to start." That first session set the tone for the weeks to come. Isabella quickly realized that Oliver's understanding of chess was fragmented, a collection of tactics and openings his father had taught him in spare moments. He knew the moves, but he didn't understand the music of the game, the underlying strategy that connected them. Isabella threw the traditional lesson plan out the window. She started not with openings, but with endgames. "We start at the end," she explained, setting up a simple king and pawn versus king scenario. Chess is about purpose. Every move must have a reason, and that reason is always tied to the endgame. If you don't know where you're going, you'll get lost after the first turn. They spent hours on these simple positions, drilling the fundamentals, until Oliver could see the path to victory, or the path to a draw, with instinctual clarity. She taught him about pawn structure, calling pawns the soul of chess. She gave them personalities. The passed pawn was the hero on a quest. The isolated pawn was the lonely soldier. The doubled pawns were clumsy brothers getting in each other's way. Oliver soaked it all in. For the first time, the game wasn't about pleasing his father or memorizing complex sequences. It was a story he could create, a world he could control. He started to laugh during their lessons, to ask questions, to volunteer his own ideas. He was coming alive, one square at a time. Arthur remained a distant, observant presence. He was rarely home when she arrived, often returning just as she was leaving. He would stand in the doorway of the library for a moment, his face unreadable, and listen. He never interfered, never offered a single suggestion. He just watched a king observing the board from a distance. One evening, as she was packing up, he stopped her in the hall. "His grades have improved," he said abruptly. "His math teacher called, said his focus and problem-solving skills are transformed." "That's chess," Isabella replied simply. "It's a gymnasium for the mind." "It seems to be more than that," Arthur said, his gaze searching. "He's lighter. He told a joke at dinner last night. I can't remember the last time he did that." A fragile moment of understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that her role was indeed becoming more than that of a simple tutor. The comprehensive discretion and loyalty clause echoed in her mind. But not everyone was pleased. Mrs. Gable's hostility grew with each passing day. She would find reasons to interrupt their lessons, offering Oliver snacks he didn't want, or reminding Isabella of the time in a pointed tone. She saw Isabella's easy rapport with Oliver as a threat to the established order of the house. To Mrs. Gable, who had been with the family since before Oliver was born, Isabella was a usurper. "The boy needs structure, not games," she said to Isabella one afternoon in the kitchen, her voice dripping with condescension. "He needs a proper governess, someone with pedigree." "He seems to be thriving," Isabella countered calmly, refusing to be baited. "For now," Mrs. Gable sniffed. "But outsiders rarely last long in this house. You would do well to remember that." The housekeeper's animosity was a minor annoyance, but it was a constant reminder of her precarious position. She was an employee, a pawn in a wealthy family's game, and she could be swept from the board at any time. The real challenge was the ghost that haunted the mansion, the ghost of Charlotte Blackwood. Her presence was everywhere. A portrait in the main hall showed a woman with laughing eyes and a brilliant smile, her arm around a much younger, softer-looking Arthur. Her favorite books, collections of poetry and classic literature, remained on her bedside table in the master suite, which Arthur had closed off. Sometimes Oliver would mention her in passing. "Mum liked the Queen's Gambit, too," he'd say. Or, "Mum used to say that every pawn could become a queen." Isabella realized she was treading on sacred ground. She was filling a silence that Charlotte had left behind, and she didn't know the rules of this particular game. One rainy afternoon, Oliver seemed particularly distracted, his moves sloppy and his attention wandering. "What's on your mind, Ollie?" Isabella asked gently. He looked up, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "It's Mum's birthday next week." Isabella's heart ached for him. "Tell me about her," she said softly. Oliver's face crumpled. "Dad doesn't talk about her anymore. It's like he wants to pretend she was never here. But I don't want to forget her." He looked at the obsidian queen in his hand. She was the queen. And now she's gone. Isabella knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. "She's not gone, as long as you remember her, Ollie. Loving her and missing her. That's how you keep her with you. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to talk about it." They didn't play any more chess that day. Instead, Oliver talked. He told her about his mother's laugh, about how she would read to him every night, about how they would play chess together in this very library. He spoke of a warmth and light that seemed to have been extinguished from the house. When Arthur came home that evening, he found them not at the chessboard, but sitting on the floor, looking through a photo album Oliver had retrieved from his room. It was filled with pictures of Charlotte. Isabella looked up expecting anger, a reprimand for overstepping her bounds. Instead, she saw a raw, unguarded grief on Arthur's face. He looked at the photo of his laughing wife, and for a moment the billionaire CEO vanished, replaced by a man utterly lost. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away, leaving Isabella and Oliver in the silent, echoing library, with the ghosts of the past all around them. She realized then that the loyalty clause in her contract wasn't about protecting the family's secrets from the world. It was about protecting the family from themselves. The encounter with the photo album shifted something in the house's delicate atmosphere. The silence that followed was heavier, freighted with unspoken words. Arthur became even more remote, his interactions with Isabella limited to clipped formal acknowledgements. Yet she could feel his eyes on her, watching, assessing. He was a man wrestling with a ghost, and he had no idea how to win. Isabella, meanwhile, felt an increasing need to understand the woman whose shadow she was living in. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a strategic necessity. To help Oliver, she needed to understand the source of his and his father's pain. She needed to understand Charlotte Blackwood. Her opportunity came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Mrs. Gable, in a rare moment of distraction, while dealing with a catering crisis for one of Arthur's dinner parties, left the door to the master suite wing ajar. It was the one part of the house that had been strictly off-limits. Driven by an impulse she couldn't quite explain, Isabella slipped inside. The suite was like a time capsule. Everything was pristine, covered in fine dust sheets. It was clear no one had entered in a long time. It felt deeply wrong to be there, a transgression of the highest order, but she pushed the feeling down. On the nightstand, just as Oliver had described, was a small stack of books, but behind them, tucked away, was something else, a series of slim, leather-bound notebooks. Her heart pounded. Hesitantly, she picked one up. The leather was soft and worn. She opened it to the first page. It was filled with elegant, precise handwriting, and it was instantly recognizable. Chess notation. Page after page was filled with it. Games analysis, theoretical novelties, tactical puzzles. It was a chess diary. Charlotte Blackwood's chess diary. Isabella sat on the edge of the dust-covered bed, completely enthralled. This was no casual player's journal. The analysis was deep, insightful, at times breathtakingly original. Charlotte had explored obscure lines of the King's Indian attack, devised her own vicious counter to the Najdorf Sicilian, and annotated her games with a wit and passion that made her feel vividly alive. Isabella felt a kinship with this unknown woman, a connection across time forged in the universal language of the 64 squares. She found an entry dated a month before Oliver's 8th birthday. Arthur gifted O a new set for his birthday. The boy has my passion, but Arthur's analytical mind. He sees the board with a clarity that sometimes frightens me. Arthur thinks he is teaching him, but I see the truth. Oliver is teaching us. He forces us to slow down, to explain, to rediscover the joy of the game beyond the cold logic of victory. As she delved deeper into the notebooks, a startling pattern began to emerge. Many of the games Oliver had tried to play with her, the specific openings and tactical ideas he favored, were right here recorded in his mother's hand. He wasn't just playing chess. He was trying to commune with his mother. He was replaying her games, using her favorite moves, speaking to her in the only language he had left. And Arthur was part of this tragic pattern too. Isabella remembered the openings he'd taught Oliver, the lines of play he pushed him to master. They were Charlotte's lines. Arthur wasn't just teaching his son chess, he was trying to resurrect his wife on the board. He was desperately searching for traces of her genius in Oliver, pushing the boy to be a perfect reflection of a memory, not realizing the immense pressure he was placing on his small shoulders. The father and son were trapped in a cycle of grief, playing the same ghost game over and over, neither knowing how to stop. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Isabella's blood ran cold. She quickly but carefully placed the notebook back where she had found it and slipped out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She made it back to the library just as Mrs. Gable walked past her face, a mask of suspicion. Isabella knew she had taken a colossal risk, but what she had discovered was worth it. It was the key to understanding the entire game. Armed with this new knowledge, her approach with Oliver changed. When he would play one of Charlotte's signature moves, she would gently guide him down a different path. "That's a strong move, Ollie," she'd say. "Your mum really loved that bishop sacrifice in the Ruy Lopez, didn't she? It's a brilliant idea. But what if we tried something new today? Something that's just yours. Let's create an Oliver variation." At first he was resistant. Playing his mother's moves was his ritual, his comfort. But Isabella was patient. She encouraged his creativity, celebrating his original ideas even when they failed. Slowly, cautiously, Oliver began to explore the board with his own mind. He started to see the game not as a way to remember the past, but as a way to build his own future. He was finally playing for himself. The true test would be confronting Arthur. It was the most dangerous move she could make. She was a mere employee. To confront her billionaire boss about his deepest personal grief was to invite dismissal, to be cast out of this world as quickly as she had been brought in. She could lose everything: the job, the money that was saving her father, the connection she had built with Oliver. She waited for the right moment, a time when he was not the CEO but the father. It came one evening a week later. She had stayed late to help Oliver with a school project, and Arthur arrived home earlier than usual, looking tired and defeated. A major acquisition he'd been working on had fallen through. He was vulnerable. He found her in the library packing her bag. Oliver was already in bed. "Thank you for staying late, Ms. Rossi," he said, his voice flat. "It's Isabella," she said softly. "I think we're past the formalities." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his weary eyes. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Arthur, we need to talk about Oliver and about Charlotte." His face hardened instantly. The shutters came down. "My late wife is not a topic for discussion. Your job is to teach my son chess." "That's what I am trying to do," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear churning inside her. "But you're making it impossible. You and he are not playing chess. You're playing with ghosts." The accusation hung in the silent room. Arthur's eyes blazed with a cold fire. "You are wildly out of line." "Am I?" She challenged, her voice rising with a passion she couldn't suppress. "The games you teach him, the openings you drill into him, they're all hers. I know it. I found her notebooks." The confession was out. The gamble was made. Arthur stared at her, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, fury at her transgression, shock at her discovery, and underneath it all a raw, undeniable pain. "You went into my room?" he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "Yes," she admitted, "because I had to understand. I had to know why this brilliant, wonderful boy was so afraid to make a move of his own. It's because he's afraid of disappointing you. He's afraid of not being her. You look at him and you don't see Oliver. You see a reflection of her genius. You're trying to preserve her memory by forcing him to become a carbon copy, but you're erasing your son in the process. Every word was a risk, a step closer to the precipice. She was a waitress from a rundown neighborhood, accusing a titan of industry of failing his own son. The power imbalance was cosmic, but she held his gaze unflinching. Arthur didn't shout. He didn't fire her. He simply sank into the armchair opposite her, the one Oliver usually sat in, and buried his face in his hands. The sound that escaped him was not a word, but a ragged, broken sob of pure grief. The king had finally been cornered. The sound of Arthur Blackwood's grief was a raw, shocking thing in the cathedral-like silence of the library. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of 2 years of rigidly controlled sorrow finally bursting forth. Isabella stood frozen, the aggressor in a battle she hadn't realized she would win so decisively. Her words, intended to be a strategic strike, had instead shattered his defenses completely. She watched as his broad shoulders shook the impeccable posture of the CEO, crumbling into the slumped form of a grieving husband. Her first instinct was to retreat, to flee the room and the intensely private moment she had triggered. But her feet remained planted. She had started this. She had to see it through. Hesitantly, she moved closer and sat in the chair beside him, the one she always used during her lessons with Oliver. She didn't touch him or offer platitudes. She just waited, creating a space for his sorrow to exist without judgment. After a long time, the sobs subsided into ragged breaths. He finally lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The mask of power was gone, and in its place was a man who looked utterly exhausted and hopelessly lost. She was everything, he said, his voice hoarse. The architect of my life. I was just the builder. I had the ambition, the drive. But she had the vision. She saw the world in a way I couldn't. She saw Patton's beauty strategy in everything. He looked around the magnificent library. She designed this room. She said a home needed a heart, and the heart should be filled with stories. After she was gone, the stories stopped. The silence, it's deafening. He finally looked at Isabella, his gaze raw and vulnerable. You're right. He confessed the admission, costing him a visible effort. I look at Oliver and I see her. The way he tilts his head when he's thinking. The way his eyes light up when he solves a puzzle. I was so terrified of losing her completely, of her memory, fading into nothing, that I clung to those pieces of her I saw in him. I pushed him to play her way, to think her way. I thought if he could become as brilliant as she was, a part of her would still be here. He let out a humorless laugh. I, the great strategist, the man who anticipates market, shifts a decade in advance, was playing the most foolish endgame imaginable. Sacrificing my son's future to hold on to my past. Isabella listened, her heart aching for this powerful broken man and the lonely boy upstairs. You didn't do it out of malice, she said softly. You did it out of love. A desperate, grieving kind of love. But Oliver needs to be allowed to be himself. He needs to know that you love him, not the ghost of her you see in him. How? Arthur asked the question, laced with helplessness. How do I fix it? I've spent 2 years building these walls. I don't know how to tear them down. You don't have to do it alone, Isabella said. She stood up and walked over to a bookshelf. You start by telling him the stories again. For the next hour they didn't speak of chess. They spoke of Charlotte. Arthur, hesitant at first, began to share memories. He told Isabella about how he and Charlotte met at a university debate tournament where she dismantled his argument with such surgical precision and wit that he fell in love on the spot. He spoke of their early years living in a tiny apartment building, his company from the ground up, while she worked as a freelance journalist, her brilliant mind, his constant sounding board. He described her passion for chess, how she saw it not as a war, but as a conversation. She used to say, "The board doesn't lie. It shows you who you are. Are you cautious, aggressive, deceitful, brave? It's all there in the moves you choose." As he spoke, Isabella saw the puzzle pieces of the Blackwood family click into place. Arthur's relentless drive, Oliver's quiet sensitivity, and the gaping hole Charlotte's vibrant strategic mind had left behind. "The contract," Arthur said, suddenly looking at her with a newfound clarity. "The comprehensive discretion and loyalty clause. It wasn't a legal failsafe. It was me. I knew on some level that I needed more than a tutor for Oliver. I needed someone to break through the silence. I just didn't have the courage to ask for help, so I wrote it into a contract instead. A transaction? The only thing I still understood." His confession was a profound moment of trust. He was laying his weaknesses bare, admitting that his carefully constructed world was a fragile facade. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted permanently. She was no longer just the waitress, the employee. She was his confidant, an ally. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking to her for guidance. "Tomorrow." Isabella said, her voice firm with purpose. "You and Oliver will not have a chess lesson. You are going to take out that photo album. And you, Arthur, are going to tell him about the day you met his mother. You are going to start filling this house with her stories again. Not just her chess games, but her life. And you are going to let him know that he doesn't have to be her to make you proud." She then added, "And I am going to bring my father's old chess books, the ones he annotated. They're filled with stories, too. We'll show Oliver that chess is a legacy, not a monument. It's something that is passed down and built upon, not something to be perfectly preserved." A fragile sense of hope began to dawn on Arthur's face. "And you?" he asked. "What about you, Isabella? You are more than a chess tutor. Stanford, the mathematics scholarship you gave up. I had my assistant look into your background when I first considered hiring you. You gave up your entire future for your father." Isabella's professional guard went up slightly. "I did what I had to do." "No," Arthur said, standing up. He seemed taller now, not with the arrogance of a CEO, but with the resolve of a man who has found a new purpose. "You made a sacrifice. My problem is not the only one that needs solving here. This partnership, it has to be a two-way street. The game is changing, Isabella. For all of us." He walked her to the door that evening, a gesture he had never made before. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she knew everything was different. The initial offer, the life-changing deal, had been about money. But it had evolved into something far more profound. It was a deal to heal a family, to rebuild a life, and perhaps to reclaim a dream she thought was long dead. The morning after Arthur's confession marked a quiet revolution within the Blackwood mansion. The oppressive silence was replaced by conversation and shared memories of Charlotte. The chessboard was still their meeting point, but it now served as a bridge between past and present, a place for Oliver to explore his own strategies without the weight of his mother's legacy. Arthur's treatment of Isabella also transformed. He began to see her not as an employee, but as a peer, a strategist, whose sharp, unconventional insights he valued. He discussed business challenges with her, and she, in turn, offered perspectives that often surprised him with their clarity. The line between tutor and confidant blurred, then vanished completely. One evening he called her into his home office. On his desk were brochures for Stanford University. "I spoke to the Dean of Admissions," Arthur said directly. "Your mathematics scholarship has been reinstated. Full ride, including living expenses. It's time for you to reclaim your future." Isabella was stunned. "Arthur, I can't accept this." "You must," he insisted, his tone firm but kind. "You saved my family, Isabella. This isn't charity, it's rebalancing the board." He went on to explain that he had established the Charlotte Blackwood Strategic Minds Foundation to support students in similar situations. The foundation would also cover all the expenses for her father to be moved to a premier memory care facility. It was an offer that dismantled every barrier in her life, a gesture of profound gratitude that left her speechless. But as one set of problems was solved, a new, more sinister one emerged. The world of corporate titans was a chessboard of its own, and Arthur had many rivals. The most dangerous was Alistair Finch, a ruthless capitalist, known for his hostile takeovers and personal animosity towards Arthur. Finch interpreted Arthur's renewed focus on his family as a sign of weakness and began circling one of his most innovative companies. Finch saw Isabella as the key to exploiting this perceived vulnerability. He cornered her one afternoon as she was leaving the estate, his car blocking hers. "Isabella Rossi," he said with predatory charm. "Alistair Finch, I've heard you're the one pulling the strings in the Blackwood house. A pity to waste such talent as a glorified nanny." He made her a blunt offer of fully sponsored return to competitive chess and her education with no strings attached. "All I ask for," he finished, "is a little insight into Arthur's state of mind, his plans for his energy company." It was a blatant attempt to recruit her as a corporate spy. He saw her as nothing more than a pawn to be bought. Isabella looked at him with cold contempt. "My arrangement with Mr. Blackwood is not your concern," she said, her voice like ice. "And if you ever approach me again, he will be the first to know." She drove away, but a sense of dread settled over her. Finch was not a man who gave up easily. He had shown his hand. By refusing to be his pawn, she had just become his target. The new game had begun, and the stakes were no longer just about healing or education. They were about survival. Isabella immediately drove back to the Blackwood mansion, her mind racing. She found Arthur in his office and explained Alistair Finch's menacing approach, every word and veiled threat. A strategic fire ignited in Arthur's eyes. "Finch sees our trust in you as a liability," he said, his voice a low growl. "Then we will show him it is our greatest strength. He wants a game, we'll give him one." What followed was a masterclass in strategy. Arthur didn't just defend, he launched a coordinated counterattack with Isabella as his unexpected queen. He brought her into his inner circle, introducing her not as a tutor, but as a special consultant. While Arthur baited a trap by leaking false rumors that his clean energy subsidiary was failing, Isabella analyzed Finch's portfolio. She found the weak point, an over-leveraged biotech firm Finch was counting on. The climax arrived at the annual shareholder meeting. Alistair Finch sat in the front row, smug and triumphant, ready to watch his rival crumble. After some brief opening remarks, Arthur announced a new strategic partner. Isabella walked onto the stage poised and confident. A murmur went through the crowd. "In chess," she began, her voice clear, "there is a concept known as a decoy gambit. You offer a piece, seemingly as a sacrifice, to lure your opponent into a trap." With surgical precision, she laid out Finch's entire strategy, exposing how he'd overextended himself to attack the energy company. Then came the checkmate. On the large screen behind her, a news headline flashed: the biotech firm's wonder drug had failed its final clinical trial. Its stock was in freefall. Finch's face went white. Arthur stepped back to the podium. "As of this morning, he announced. The Charlotte Blackwood Foundation has acquired a controlling interest in Mr. Finch's now distressed biotech firm. With his capital frozen, his hostile takeover has failed. It was a complete and utter rout, a public corporate checkmate. Finch stared at Isabella with disbelief and hatred before storming out of the auditorium in disgrace, utterly ruined. Later that evening, the victory felt quiet and personal. Arthur Oliver and Isabella stood on the balcony of his office, watching the city lights. "You were magnificent," Arthur said, his voice filled with awe. "We were magnificent," she corrected him. "It was a team game." Oliver, who had watched the whole event, beamed with pride. "You used the Queen's gambit, Izzy. You sacrificed a pawn to win the whole game." Isabella smiled and ruffled his hair. She looked from Oliver to Arthur, her heart full. Arthur reached out and took her hand, a gesture of partnership respect and a shared future. "The board is set for a new game, Isabella Rossi," Arthur said softly. "And for the first time in a very long time, I can't wait to see the next move." Their journey proves that sometimes the most life-changing opportunities don't come from a grand plan, but from a small, unexpected moment of human connection, a simple game of chess in the corner of a restaurant. It's a powerful reminder that a person's worth is never defined by their job title or their bank account, but by their character, their intellect, and their heart. Arthur Oliver and Isabella started as a billionaire, a lonely boy and a struggling waitress, but they became a family bound not by blood, but by a shared understanding of strategy, sacrifice, and second chances. Their story shows us that everyone is fighting a battle we can't see, and the most powerful move we can ever make is to treat everyone with dignity and respect. If this story of unexpected connection and finding family in the most unlikely of places moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story about beating the odds, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will touch your heart. Comment below with your favorite move in their story.